This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, welcome. Good morning. Happy Ugadi to everyone. So just to give you a quick recap of yesterday's class, I have taught you some practical sessions of upcasting, right? In what situation we really use upcasting. So I have taken an example of a method where in the method, when the return type of a method is a superclass, then that method usually returns the subclass object. Okay, so yesterday I took you through 2 to 3 examples, right? So today also I'll start with one more example, and through that I'm going to teach you what is uh, late binding or dynamic binding and what is runtime polymorphism. So agenda of today's discussion is late binding, dynamic binding, and also one more concept called runtime polymorphism. I hope you're clear with the context of the discussion. Okay, so let's start with today's session with some practical examples. Okay. First, let me open Eclipse. Uh, 10:30, 8:30 batch. I have opened Eclipse. Okay, so let's start today's session with one practical example. I'm going to take you through a scenario of PUBG game. Okay, listen to me carefully. So today's scenario, today's session, I'm going to start with a practical scenario of PUBG game. Okay, let's design a small PUBG game. Okay, in this game, you all know that because you guys, like, I believe that you guys play PUBG. Even if you don't play, let's go with an assumption. Okay, imagine that, try to imagine that you are playing PUBG game. Okay, so you are a player and you are playing a game. So game is one object, and as a player you are one object. Are you clear? I'll repeat. So you are a player and game is an object. You are a player, player is also an object. So when when a player is playing a game, okay, let me explain this. Let's say this is a game. You are playing this game in a tab, right? And the player is playing the game. On the left side, let's say there is one button. There is one button, okay? So as a player, you are going to press this button. As a player, you're going to press this button, okay? Try to visualize this. So when I'm explaining this scenario, literally a game comes to your mind. Okay, you should think about a game, right? So when a player is playing the game, right, you have a tab and you started playing the game like this. So while playing the game, you're going to press the button. That's the behavior. Are you clear? You're going to press the button. In the game, you're going to press the button. The moment you press the button, game is going to randomly gives you either a gun or a game randomly may give you bomb, or the game may randomly gives you a knife. Please try to understand it, okay? Okay, try to understand it. So a player is playing the game. While playing the game, let's say you want to kill the enemy. It's a PUBG game, and while playing this, you want to kill the enemy. For you to kill the enemy, you need some weapon. So that's the reason you're going to click on this button. The moment you click on this button, the randomly game might gives you a gun or a bomb or a knife that's not in your control. Please try to understand it. And what has to be returned is decided by this game, not by you. So you are supposed to use, if basically if for a player, if game gives a gun, you're supposed to use the gun. And how you are going to use the gun? Shoot. Okay, so now if a game gives you bomb, if the game gives you a bomb, then how are you going to use the bomb? You're going to blast the bomb. Similarly, if while playing the game, if the game gives you a knife, how are you going to use the knife? You're going to stab. Using that knife, you're going to stab, right? These are all the different ways of using the weapon. So, but gun can be used, bomb can be used, knife can be used. Okay, bomb, knife, and the gun can be used. So, can I say use is a common behavior? You can use a gun, you can use a bomb, you can use the knife. But the way you use is different. Try to understand it. But the way we use this weapon is different. Okay. Okay. So what I'm trying to explain out of this is gun is an object, bomb is an object, knife is also an object. Try to understand it. All three different objects are there, and common behavior is use. Use is a common behavior, but the way we use is different. You cannot see, how do you use a gun? You can shoot using the gun, correct? But can you shoot using a bomb? You cannot shoot using a bomb. So the way you use a bomb is different, right? You blast the bomb, but you cannot blast the gun. Similarly, you cannot blast the knife, you cannot shoot the knife, right? Knife is used to stab. So it means to say such a type of behavior is technically called as object specific behavior. What is this called as? Object specific behavior. OSB, object specific behavior. So this is an basically introduction to polymorphism. Okay, listen to me carefully. Object specific behavior, or it is also called polymorphic behavior. Okay, what is the meaning of polymorphic? Poly means many. Poly means many. Morphe means forms. So many forms, that is different forms. Okay, different forms. Anything which takes different forms is called as polymorphic. So what is taking different form here? A behavior is taking different form. Again, I'll observe here, gun is an object, bomb is an object, knife is an object. Okay, object. They all have the common behavior called use. Use is a common behavior, but the way we use that, the way that this use method works, it's a method. Behavior is nothing but a method, right? This method works differently for gun, works differently for bomb, works differently for knife. The way we use the knife is different from the way we use the bomb object, which is totally different from the way that we use gun object. Such a behavior, such a method which behaves differently based on what it is behaving differently, based on the object it is behaving differently. Such a behavior is called as what? Object specific behavior, or polymorphic. Different forms. A behavior is same, but it is taking different forms, and based on what it is taking different forms, based on the object it is taking different forms. That's why it is called polymorphic behavior or object specific behavior. Are you all clear now? So behavior is same. So on gun, bomb, knife, they all are objects. To create an object, what is really required? Class is required. Try to understand. So we have gun, bomb, knife. All the three are objects. And to create an object, what is required? We need something called class, because without the class, we cannot create any objects. Okay, so that's the reason. First thing, I need three classes. I'm going to now practically define three different classes. Just observe. Okay, so let me create a new project. Let me create a new Java project. I call it as PUBG project or game project. Okay, call it as game project. I'm going to close all the other project, right click and close. So now let me create a class. I'm going to create a class called as bomb. So I have created a class called as bomb because I need the bomb object. That's why. Similarly, I'm going to create another class called as gun. Gun, and also I'm going to create a class called as, let's say, gun is over, bomb is over. What is next? Knife. So three separate classes are there, hence I can create three separate objects. Are you clear? So this is one thing. And all of these has a common behavior called use. And this behavior is polymorphic behavior. I'll repeat, this behavior is called as what? Polymorphic behavior. So, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to design my program in this way. So let me create one class called as bomb, bomb, gun, knife. So all of this has, now I'm going to write generalization. Please observe this combination of many different topics of Java. Okay, this is one example, but I'm using many different concepts of Java. Okay, let me apply generalization. Just to give you once again to repeat what is generalization. It is representation of, or generalization is a concept of representing different multiple objects by one common category. I'll repeat, representing multiple different objects by one common category. For example, I have the bomb object, I have the gun object, knife object. What is commonly called? These things are what is commonly called as. Can you in the chat box? Can you reply me in the chat box? In the chat box, just commonly. Yes, super. Pankaj, Vijay. Okay, super. Weapon. It's commonly called as weapon. Very good. Very good. Very good. Just observe now. So, bomb is an object, gun is an object, knife is also an object, correct? They are commonly called as weapon. They're commonly called as what? Weapon. So, weapon is a generalized form of knife. Can I call knife as a weapon? Gun as a weapon? Bomb as a weapon? So, weapon is a generalized form of bomb, gun, knife. Knife is a specialized form of weapon. Gun is a specialized form of weapon. So, bomb is a specialized form of weapon. So subclass is a specialized form of superclass, and superclass is the general form of the subclass. I'll repeat my sentence once again. Listen to me carefully. Superclass is the generalized form of different subclasses. Okay. A subclass is a specialized form of superclass. So knife is a subclass, which is a specialized form of superclass called weapon. Correct? Whereas a superclass called weapon is a generalized form of subclass called gun. You're able to understand now? So how do we achieve this generalization? By using a concept of Java called inheritance. So I should write one superclass and multiple subclasses which extend, extend, extend. Okay, knife extends weapon. This is also called is a relationship. Okay, next concept is this. Here in the weapon class, okay, now bomb class, you have a method called use. Here also you have a method called use. Here also you have a method called use because we can use the gun, knife, and bomb. So it means to say use is a common method. That's why what do? I define that use method here in the superclass called weapon. I define the method. Please try to understand it carefully. I define a method called use in the supermost class called weapon, and but the way we use is different. The way we use bomb is different, gun is different, knife is different. So this is called polymorphic behavior or object specific behavior. That is the reason we have to override. Observe now the purpose of overriding. When the behavior behaves differently for different objects, we have to override it. So hence I'm going to override it. I have already taught you what is overriding, okay? So when you override this method in the bomb class, what is the way, how do we use the bomb? We blast the bomb. So you override this. Someone please keep your microphone in the mute mode. So the way we use gun is different, hence I need to override this. How do we override? Yes, override the method. How do you use a gun? How do you use a gun? Shoot. You're going to shoot using this gun, correct? Similarly, the use method behaves differently for knife object. Hence, what I'm supposed to do in the knife class also override the method. Override the method. How do we use the knife? We're going to stab, right? This is what we are supposed to do. So write a superclass called weapon and define a method called use and override this method. And the only one purpose of overriding here is to achieve polymorphic behavior. Behavior means method. So this is a behavior or a method. Since this method is polymorphic, polymorphic means which works differently for a different object, and object of bomb works differently, hence override. The object of gun works differently, override. This is what we're supposed to do now. Okay, so I have explained you concept. Now we are supposed to implement this concept in Eclipse using program. Just try to understand it. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is this. I have a class called bomb, gun, knife, but I need to write a common superclass. Hence I'm going to define a class called as weapon. I'll define a class called as weapon. Click on finish. Okay, so now what I'm supposed to do, inherit this. So knife extends weapon, gun extends weapon, bomb also extends weapon. Extends. Are you clear? So one superclass called weapon, which is extended by 3 different classes. So next step in the weapon class, I must define a method called as use. So define a method called as use. So now knife, how do you use knife? You should override. How do you override? Write the method name, control space bar in Eclipse. Write the method name, use control space bar. Just observe, this is the way to use. So how are we going to use this knife? So we're going to stab and use the knife. For example, use the knife and stab. Similarly, we have to override the same method even in the gun class. How do you use the gun? Use the gun and shoot. Use the gun and shoot. Similarly, how are we supposed to use this in the bomb? Override this method, use the bomb and blast. We're supposed to blast, okay? So this is how we override. Okay, so what have we done as of now? We created a project. In the project, we created one superclass and defined a method called use method. And this method is common to knife, gun, and bomb. But we have overridden this method in all the 3 subclasses. The only purpose of overriding this in the subclass is to achieve polymorphic behavior, or uh, it's also called as object-specific behavior. That's why we have overridden. Till now, one of the part of our practical implementation is done. Okay, let us keep it aside. Let's close everything. Now, let us go back to this concept called a game concept. Okay, so before I start with the let's say game, I'm going to explain you some more things here. Okay, just observe. You have a game. You have a game. In the game, there is a button on the left side. Let's say this is a button. When we press on this button, when we click this button, the game has to give us different weapon. It may have to give you gun or bomb or knife. Bomb, knife, or gun. In what scenario it has to give bomb? In what scenario it has to give you gun? In what scenario it has to give you knife? Right? It depends on the player score. The player is playing the game based on the score of the player. Okay, based on the score of the player. Let's say assume the rules of the game is that if player score is somewhere around let's say um, 0 to 300. Let's say if the player score is 0 to 300, then the game should return knife. The game should return knife. Let's say if the score is somewhere around 301 to 600, let's say the game has to return something called gun. Okay, so it's just like this. If the player score is 0 to 300, this is the rules of the game. Okay, we're assuming it. If the player score is between 0 to 300, the game gives the knife. It's an ordinary weapon. Okay, you cannot kill more people using knife. Let's imagine if the game, if the player score is somewhere around 301 to 600, then the game gives you a better weapon called gun. Gun is better than knife. Okay. Let's say if the player score is somewhere around 601 and above, if the player score is 601 and above, it has to give a bomb, definitely a better weapon than the gun, because using gun you can shoot only few people, but you can using bomb you can kill many enemies. So this is the assumption. Okay, so when a player is playing, if the player wants to kill an enemy, then the player needs a weapon. How do the player gets the weapon? By pressing this button. When player press this button, so behavior is called press the button. I'll repeat, this is the behavior, press the button. When a player press the button on the game, then the game has to return either bomb or knife or gun. That purely depends on the score. Depending on the score, it has to return. Please understand it. Okay, so now we need to define, so game is an object, hence we need to create a class called as game, and the game must have a method called press the button or click the button. Okay, the game must have a behavior called click the button. Are you clear? We are going to define that behavior now. Okay, let's practically implement it. Now let's do it. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a new class. I'm going to create a new class called as game. Okay, I define a new class called as game. Game must has a better method called click the button. Okay, this is the behavior. When someone click the button, what has to be written? This method has to return either knife, or gun or bomb. So it all depends on the score. So integer score of the player. How do you get the score of the player? Let's say the score comes from somewhere around the data from the database. In the database, you're storing all the score of the player, and this score comes from the database. Right now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to assume some score. Okay? For example, integer score equal to 550. I'm assuming certain things, okay? Please understand it. I'm assuming it. But actually, in the realistic scenario, this score comes from the database, or comes from the storage. It comes from storage, okay? So now what we are supposed to do, we have to perform if-else condition. If the score of the player is anywhere less than or equal to 300, it's anywhere less than or equal to 300, then the game has to return what? Knife object. This is the rules. Knife k equal to new knife, and finally return k. Now I'm returning k. What is the data type of k? Knife. Hence method return type must be knife, because it is fundamentals of method that method must have a return type, and a method has a return type, we need to have the return statement. Or in another way, if a method has a return statement, then return type is compulsory in Java. So this is one condition. Let's say, for example, else if score score okay, score is greater than equal to okay, greater than 300, very important. Score is greater than 300, and also score is less than or okay, score is greater than 300. Score must be greater than 300, and score is less than or equal to 600. Less than or equal to 600. Then the game must return which object? Gun object. Gun G equal to new gun. And finally return G. Hence return G. What is the data type of G? Gun. Okay, super. Now return type is already knife, or it should be gun. Okay. Now last condition, else I need not to check for another condition once again. Anything which is not matching this criteria, then I have to return which object? Bomb object. Bomb B equal to new bomb. Bomb B equal to new bomb. Finally return bomb. Return B. Okay. So what is the data type of B? Data type of B is bomb. Data type of this. But the method cannot have multiple return type, right? A method can have only one return type. Okay, so observe now, my situation is this. If the score of the player is anywhere less than or equal to 300, then I have to return knife. If it is more than 300, right, and less than or equal to 600, I have to return gun. So apart from that, if it is not even the gun or knife, if the score is more than 600, let's say, then I have to return bomb object. So now in the chat window, everyone, please message me what should be the return type of the method, because I'm writing three return types: knife or gun or bomb. Super. All are answering weapon. Yes. Understood. This is what we learned in our previous session. Super. Good, 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 good. So now I'm going to write a common return type of the method called weapon. Actually, this is called, generalization, or this is where like your upcasting is really useful. So I'm returning the subclass object. Listen to me carefully. I'm returning subclass object, but the return type of the method is superclass. You understand? Good. Super. Yeah, Harish is answering. Is there a weapon or an object? Yes. Object also fine. But yesterday also I taught you that try to avoid too much of generalization. Object is too much of generalization. In that case, I can return string also. I can return car object also from here if it is superclass object. That's why try to be specific. Okay, it's always a good practice. So now we have a game. For example, what is the name of this game? Let's say PUBG. This is the game, PUBG game. In the PUBG game, what you're going to do? You're going to click the button, right? So now the last option, I'm going to create one more class called as player. In the player class, what I'm going to do, I'm going to define a main method. Now assume that player plays the game. For a player to play the game, what is required? Game is required. Hence create an object of game, new game. Very important. Harsha is asking, sir, do the upcasting at the time? What is the meaning of do the upcasting at the time of creating object of subclass? I didn't understand the question, Harsha. So now I have the game object. Now try to visualize. Harsha, hold on. Park your question for 2 minutes. Let me explain this. Let me complete this. Okay. Now we have a game. You are a player. You are a player. For example, player name is you. It's you. It's you. Your name. Okay. Player. Let's imagine you are the player. While you are playing the game, you need a game first. While playing the game, okay, you're going to click the button. How do you click the button? gm.click. gm.click. So you're going to click the button or you're going to press the button. One and the same. Okay, you're going to press the button or click the button. Okay, just hold on for a while. I have certain images to demonstrate. Okay, I have taken here it as press the button. Okay, now what I'll do, I'll rename this method as press the button because I have an image ready to explain this. Okay, so how do you rename? First select the method name, right click, refactor, rename. Rename it into press button. Rename this into press button. Okay, now method name is press button. So you have the game. While playing the game, you are a player, okay? While playing the game, you need to kill enemy. Hence, so to kill an enemy, you need a weapon. How do you get a weapon? So game has to give you a weapon. When does the game give the weapon? When you press the button. When you press the button, game gives you a weapon. So how do you take it? Now I need that. Don't you need that weapon now? Yes, you have to use that. Hence you need that. Isn't it? Hence you need that weapon. How do you take that weapon? In the chat window, just answer me. How do you take the weapon written by this method? When you press the button, game gives you weapon. How do you take that weapon? Write the complete code in the yes in the chat window. Write the complete code. Yes, assigning this into a variable. Super. What should be the data type of that variable? Chat window. Super. Vijay, correct. Weapon, perfectly fine. So I think you are now getting super. So now weapon w equal to gm dot press the button. Perfect. I think you got it now. I'll tell you, if you can understand this concept, just blindly think, the further part of Java becomes so easy for you. Further part of Java becomes very, very easy for you. And this is one of the important thing. That is the reason, if you observe from past 3 days, in the last previous two sessions, we discussed only about it. And in today's session also, almost we are discussing the same. The only reason is this is the most important concept of Java. Okay. And looking into your answer, I'm happy that most of you are getting, this concept. Good. So now I'm going to use the weapon. How do you use the weapon? Use it. Super now. Use. Okay. Pallavi is asking me to show the weapon class. Okay. Observe weapon class as a method called use, which is overridden in all the three subclasses. Okay, Pallavi? Like Ekta is also correct. Ekta, Vinod, Pallavi, almost all of you are correct. Okay, good. So now tell me, okay, hold on. Okay, just observe now. Don't type anything, don't type the answer. You all are correct. Good. Now observe. We have reached a very, very crucial stage now. Okay. Now try to memorize upcasting. Try to memorize upcasting. Can I call this line of code as upcasting? So the reference which is there in the left side is superclass, but this is going to return you, this method is going to return you either knife object, nothing but subclass object, or gun object, which is nothing but subclass object, or bomb object, which is nothing but subclass object. Now that's why observe this diagram. Observe this diagram. I have game G or GM equal to new game. Here I have considered it as G. Maybe I'm going to make it as G, game G. Okay. Now observe. Game G equal to new game. I have the game object, and G dot press the button. You're going to press the button. When you press the button, the game may give you a gun object. Game may give you a knife object, or the game might give you weapon object. Okay, try to understand it. The game may give you gun object, or it may give you knife object, or it may give you bomb object. Observe. In all the three different cases, this one, especially this one, is a superclass reference. It's called superclass reference. So I'll assume one by one. It is returning you knife object. So it becomes weapon W equal to knife object. Okay, it's going to give you weapon W equal to knife object. So object is from knife, that is subclass. The reference is from superclass. This is scenario number one. If your score is somewhere around 0 to 300, this is the story. What if your score is between 301 to 600? 301 to 600, then this method is going to give you gun object. In such case, this is superclass reference. The object is from subclass. Observe, it is a gun object, which is nothing but a subclass object, correct? If your score is somewhere around 601 and above, if your score is 601 and above, then the game is going to give you a bomb object, which is nothing but subclass object. So these are all subclass object. Observe. This is a subclass object, object of bomb class, object of gun class, object of knife class. They all are subclass object. So reference is superclass. In all the cases, reference is superclass. Right side object is subclass. Are you clear? That's why this line of code, this one is called as what? Upcasting. Okay, not this one, not this one. Okay, that is only creation of game object. Okay. Okay, this line, the highlighted one, this is called as upcasting. So I hope you understood this concept. Hence, this line of code is called as upcasting. Now, again, another concept. In case of upcasting, if you remember long back, I taught you two characteristics of upcasting. How many characteristics? Two characteristics of upcasting. So what are the two characteristics of upcasting? The first one, in case of upcasting, using a superclass reference, we cannot call subclass variables and subclass methods. I'll repeat, in case of upcasting using superclass reference, we cannot call subclass variables and subclass methods. That's the first rule. But here in my case, let's say for example, the gun, knife, they're all subclass, which may not have any specific methods. It has only overridden method, but there is no method which is very specific to subclass. Most of the methods and variables are common. Okay. Now, the second rule of upcasting, which is applicable for this scenario, is this. In case of upcasting, using superclass reference, W is a reference of types weapon, which is a superclass. In case of upcasting using a superclass reference, when we call an overridden method, you are calling or invoking an overridden method. Observe, this method is overridden. It's present in the weapon class and it is overridden in the which class? What are the subclasses? Knife, right? It is overridden in the gun class, overridden bomb class, overridden. So these are all overridden methods, right? So in case of upcasting using a superclass reference, when we call an overridden method, then implementation gets executed from dash. Answer me in the chat window. From where the implementation gets executed? Yes, logic gets executed from subclass. Super. So now tell me, correct. You all are correct. Good. Super. Correct. All are correct. Now tell me, now when I run this program, from where the subclass, which subclass? In this case, three subclasses. Right? In my case, there are three subclasses: gun class, bomb class, and also called knife class. So from which class the logic gets executed? In all, like observe here, knife also has overridden, okay? And bomb also has overridden, right? Gun also has overridden. This method is overridden in three different subclasses. Yes, Praveen is 100% correct. It depends on the score. All correct. So super. Most of you are answering perfectly correct. It depends on the score. But in my case, I have hard coded this, but this actual score comes from database. Here, for example, I have taken it as 550. It can be 300 also, or it can be 30 also, or 50 also. Score can be anything. Purely this depends on the score. So this is not in your control. You're able to understand. If the score is, let's say, 100, obviously it's going to return knife. If the score is 400, sorry, not here. Let's say if the score is, I'll give some space here. Okay, let's assume if the score is 100, it is going to return knife. Let's say if your score is 450, then of course it's going to return gun. If its score is 700, if score is 700, it's going to return bomb. Here I have hard coded, but in this scenario, actually the score comes from the database. So it means to say this entire program is more dynamic. It's more dynamic and everything works. Correct, Shubham? Everything works based on the score. You're able to understand? So now, which method here when you run this program, which method is going to be executed? You cannot tell which method is going to be executed. Compiler cannot tell which method is going to be executed. JVM also cannot tell which method is going to be executed. It depends on the score which is there in the database. Understand now? It all depends on the score which is there in the database. So now in my program, now I'm going to run this. Now observe, use the bomb. It is giving me an output called use the bomb and blast. It means to say the game has given me bomb. The game has given me bomb, okay? Game has given me bomb. So now let's say because the score is 700. Now score is only 200. Now when you run this program, score is 200. Now I'm going to run this program. When I run this program, so what is the output? When the score is 200, the game is going to give me knife and I'm going to use the knife. Think about it. You as a player, you can use that weapon which is given by a game. If game gives you whatever the weapon given by game, that is what you can use, isn't it? That is so realistic. If game is giving you knife, can you shoot using knife or blast? You cannot do that. It all depends on game. So my program is more dynamic program, right? So let's say last, if the score is 500, of course, now when I run my program, I'm going to run my program. When I run my program, I'm going to get the gun. Hence, I'm going to use the gun. How are you going to use this gun? By shooting. Use the gun and shoot. This is how I use this. Okay. So this program is more realistic. Actually speaking, without your knowledge, you learned dynamic binding and also dynamic polymorphism. You learned both the concept, but you don't know what is that concept. I will explain you that concept. But in this example, you already learned runtime polymorphism, nothing but dynamic binding. How, I will explain to you. But if you can ask me any question if you have in this particular practical scenario. I hope I strongly hope that you understood this concept. Yeah, thank you. Super. Did you enjoy this scenario? So yesterday, a student was asking, sir, when are you going to start collection framework concept, exception handling? I understand your anxiety that you want to you want to finish your course at the earliest. But if you observe these 3 days, three classes, including today's class, okay, I slow down myself and emphasize or concentrated more on the scenario because this is the important stage of learning in Java. If you understand these concepts which I have taught, then further concepts become very easy for you. Okay, that is the reason I slowed down here and given you much more examples right on this. So Pankaj is asking me a question. Sorry, is return statement, if we use this, then what will be the return? Pankaj, your question, I could not understand. What is that? Is in return statement, if you use this, then what will be written? This means what? Yes, Smita is asking question. Dynamic method dispatch. 100% correct, Smita. This concept is called dynamic binding. Dynamic binding is nothing but dynamic method dispatch, which is nothing but runtime polymorphism. Oh, Nidhi, never expect backup class. You missed yesterday's class, so can I get backup class? Absolutely no. You have to go through that recording session. Okay, Nidhi? Yesterday's recording sessions are available. You can go through it. Nagendra is asking, is a runtime polymorphism? 100% yes, Nagendra. Good. Okay, fine. So now I will explain you what is dynamic binding. Okay. No, 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 no. Pankaj, not. No, no, no. Pankaj, you are wrong. That's not possible. See, Pankaj is telling gun G equal to new gun. I'll. Shiv Kumar is saying that my voice is muted for every 2 minutes. I don't think, Shiv Kumar. I believe that there is some internet issue at your end. That's why it is, since it is buffering, that could be the reason. But no one is telling this concern. Now, Pankaj, to answer your question here, Pankaj is telling knife k equal to new knife, and Pankaj is telling return this. No, Pankaj, what happens? This is a keyword which means object of current class. Object of current class means object of game class. So here, current class, wherever you write, see, you are using this keyword within the game class. So it refers to an object of game. I don't want to return an object of game. I want to return an object of knife. Hence, this is wrong. You cannot use that. Okay, Pankaj? Okay, HP is asking that, sir, please show the all the programs. I want to take a screenshot or photo. Okay, you can take the photo of it if you wish. Okay, first let me show you this program, weapon. Take the photo of it if you wish. No problem. Hey, do one thing here. I'll do one thing. I can do one thing. Okay, you know my Facebook group, no? Facebook group by name Shishira. It's a group name. I will zip all these programs. I will post it there. Download entire application only. Entire project I will upload. Download it from there. Is it good? Thing here. Is the link. Okay. Okay, this link. I've shared this link with you guys. You can be the member of this group. I'm going to post this entire, this entire program only, entire project. I'll upload it for you guys. Right? Done. Yeah, sure. After this class, after my second class, because after your class, I have immediately back to back one more session. I'll do it by 1:30 or 2 o'clock. Okay. Entire project I'll share. You can simply download. So you need not to simply take the photo of it and all those things. Okay. Done. Good. So now close this all. Now observe. So everyone observe. Now I'll start with teaching you a concept called or dynamic binding or runtime binding. It's also called dynamic method dispatch. Different names are there for this. I'll just teach you here different names. It's called dynamic binding. It's called dynamic binding, or it's also called dynamic method dispatch, or it's also called late binding. Okay. Late binding. It's also called late binding. So it's called late binding or dynamic method dispatch. Concept is one and the same. Let's understand what is the meaning of it. Okay. Shruti is asking, is overriding compulsory to perform dynamic binding? Yes. Yes, Shruti, correct. You need to have to override this. Okay. Yeah. Let's understand what is this dynamic binding. Here. So now I have minimized everything. Let's see to it. I'll open this. Now I'll start explaining what is dynamic binding. Okay. So it's a simple concept. You know what is method binding. Just to give you a recap of what we learned in our previous session, what is the meaning of method binding? A method has two parts. One is called declaration, another one is called definition. So declaration is the method header, and definition is the method body. That is nothing but the method logic. And whenever we call the method, then we have to attach the logic, right? We have to attach the logic, and this is the example. If I'm not wrong, I've given you this example. Let's say you have a method called click or double click. So this is called method declaration. This is called method definition. Okay, this part is called method definition or body, or better word, implementation. implementation or definition. So this is called as method declaration. And whenever we call such method, let's assume this method is present in a class called mouse class. Then I'm going to call the method something like this. Right now I'm going to call this m dot double click. So now, which logic is supposed to be executed? This is called method call. This line of code is called as method call or method implementation. Method call or method implementation. Whenever we call the method or invoke the method, sorry, is not method implementation, method call or method invocation, sorry, not method call or method invocation, sorry. It's called method invocation. Whenever you invoke a method, logic has to be binded. So this logic gets binded. That is, this is method call, this is method. So take this, bind them. This is called method binding. So method binding is the process of attaching the method definition to its method call. This process is called as what? Method binding. And there are two types of binding. One is called early binding, another one is called late binding. And early binding I taught you in my previous session. So early binding is a process where binding decision is taken by compiler in the compilation step itself. Okay, late binding is a binding where decision about binding is taken by JVM at runtime. So in late binding, binding decision is taken by JVM at runtime. Okay, this is called late binding or dynamic binding. So let us understand this dynamic binding with the PUBG game program which I have already created. Okay, just observe now. Now, let's imagine I write the code like this. Weapon W equal to, this is superclass reference. I can give three different objects, isn't it? New, either knife object, or I can give a gun object, or I can also give a reference of bomb object. In all the three cases, we call it as upcasting. And W is a reference. What is the data type of reference? A superclass called weapon. So now knife has also overridden. In the knife class, we have overridden a method called, in the knife class, we have overridden the use method, overridden the use method, overridden the use method, right? So it means to say, so use method has some logic here. Same use method has different logic. Try to understand different logic. This is, I call it as logic 1 or definition 1. This I call it as logic 2 or definition 2. Same use method is overridden in the bomb class also, and this also different logic. So logic is different in all the three cases. You're able to understand? So use method is overridden. Now, if I call the method called w.use, can I call it as a method call or method invocation? This is called method call or method invocation. This is called method call or method invocation. So whenever we call the method or invoke the method, okay, which logic is supposed to be executed right now? Definitely when you call a method, some logic is supposed to be executed. Should this logic be, should it be should it be, when you call a method, should it be logic 1 or should it be logic 2 or should it be logic 3? So which logic is supposed to be executed? This depends on object. This purely depends on object. So who based on what factor we are taking a decision? Based on the object we are taking a decision. An object is created at compile time or runtime. Object is created by JVM. JVM comes into picture only at runtime. Yes or no? JVM executes a program. Which program JVM executes? JVM executes bytecode. Bytecode is generated means compilation is already over. So after successful compilation, bytecode is generated, and that bytecode is an input to your JVM. So JVM is a runtime entity. So JVM works everything only at runtime. An object is created, of course, at runtime. So now whenever we call this method, which logic is supposed to be executed? Nothing but binding. We have to bind either the logic 1 or logic 2 or logic 3 to this method call. That process is called binding. And here binding happens based on the object. Based on the object. Are you clear now? Try to understand this program. Okay. Now, if we go back to this program, I have something called player class, right? I compile all these program. I compile bomb program, game program, gun, knife, player, all the program, entire programs are compiled. After successful compilation, what is generated? Bytecode is generated. It means to say, please guys, please concentrate, okay? Don't deviate, concentrate, okay? So in all these cases, compilers has already successfully compiled your program. Successfully compiled program means your bytecode is generated in all these cases. In all these cases, bytecode is generated. It means to say the bytecode is generated by compiler, and compiler has not taken any decision. This is, observe here, this code. If we are already calling a method, this is called method call or method invocation. Okay, this is called method call or method invocation. Whenever we call a method, whenever we call a method or invoke a method, definitely some logic is supposed to be attached. Which is that logic is supposed to be attached? Should I attach the logic which is present in gun class? Should I attach the logic which is present in bomb class, or should I attach the logic which is present in knife class? Which logic should be attached? That decision cannot be taken by compiler, if you observe. Because how compiler decides what is the score? If in this entire program, observe here, in this program some logic has to be attached. That logic has to be attached depends on, observe this diagram. Whenever I call this method, whenever I call the method, I mean this method is going to give you object of gun or knife or bomb. Based on the object returned by this method, everything is decided, right? So we never know what is the object which is written by this method. It depends on the score which is there in the database. I'll repeat this. The object written by this method depends on the score which is there in the database. We don't know, compiler also don't know, JVM also don't know what is that. So hence, once I start running the program, once I start running means compiler should compile, generate the bytecode. So compiler cannot take any decision. Compiler says, Anna, when this logic is, when you are calling a method, I really don't know what is the logic has to be binded. So hence it is not in my hand. You only take a decision. This is what on the other day when I was explaining this binding, I had given one real-time example that static binding or early binding is that I ask you to go to shop and bring paneer or fresh capsicum. What you are supposed to bring is already decided by me. I say that you have to bring capsicum means you have to bring capsicum. You don't have a choice. You cannot make a decision of what to be brought. You have to simply bring such vegetable which I ask you. That's the first scenario. That's called early binding, where decision is taken by me. You have to simply do that. Where in the second scenario, scenario number 2, I don't know what fresh vegetable. I say that you please go to shop and bring the fresh vegetable available in the shop. Okay. So now you also don't know what fresh vegetable is available. I also don't know what fresh vegetable is available. You have to first go to shop. There you have to decide which is fresh, bring that vegetable. Able to understand? That's called dynamic binding. So here in dynamic binding, whenever we call the method, we don't know what logic has to be executed or binded. Similarly, compiler also don't know what logic has to be binded or what definition has to be binded, because it depends on object, and at compile time here we cannot tell which object is going to be given by this method, because it depends on score which is there in the database. In the database, if your score is 800, then it is bomb object. Hence, when I call this method of logic of bomb class, this logic this logic should be binded. This logic should be binded. If score is only 100, then the method gives you knife. In such case, logic of which method? This logic should be binded. So this depends on runtime entity. Hence, compiler is not going to take a decision. Compiler says, JVM, you only take a decision. I'm helpless now. Okay, in this scenario, when we run the program at runtime, when we run the program, now when this program starts executing, you are going to get a score from the database. Based on the score that you are going to get the database, of course, based on that score, the object is going to be created. So based on that object, which is created at runtime, accordingly, the logic gets binded, and this is called dynamic binding or late binding. Why do we call it as late binding? There are two stages. One is compilation stage, one is execution stage. Execution stage is the second stage. Compilation stage is the first stage, early stage. So that's why execution stage is called as runtime or late stage. Since this decision is happened by decision is taken by JVM at runtime, in this stage, it's called as late binding or dynamic binding. Okay, it's also called dynamic method dispatch. What is the meaning of method dispatch? Method call or method invocation itself is nothing but dispatch. So method dispatch is nothing but you're calling a method, that's called method dispatch. So whenever you call the method or dispatch a method, so logic is binded at runtime dynamically based on the object. So this is called runtime or dynamic binding. Okay. So I'll give you the definition of runtime binding. Runtime binding is nothing but a binding process which happens at runtime. This decision about binding is taken care by JVM based on the object which is created at runtime. So in simple, precisely the definition is that method, okay, what is that? Call to a method. Call to a method is resolved at runtime. Repeat, call to a method is resolved at runtime. Based on what factor it is going to be resolved? Based on the object. And this object is created at runtime and decision is taken by JVM. This is the entire process of runtime or dynamic binding or runtime binding or however you call dynamic method dispatch or late binding, whatever you want to call it as. All right now. So in the chat box, you can ask me question if you have related to this late binding. Yes, Praveen. Naveen, static binding means input values are provided by user. Not necessarily. Hmm. So where compiler takes a decision based on method arguments. Okay, Shrikant Naik is asking again the definition. It's pretty simple here. Definition of runtime binding is this. Runtime binding is a process wherein the binding happens at runtime by JVM based on the object. So that is JVM decides which method logic is supposed to be binded, and that decision is taken by JVM based on the object. Okay, that is call to a method, call to a method is resolved at runtime. Praveen, you are correct. Sure. Thank you, Sony. Lay Guldo. Someone is asking, inheritance is compulsory for dynamic binding. So without inheritance, do you override a method? I'm telling overriding is required. Without overriding, without inheritance, how can you override a method? So obviously inheritance is also required. Ekta is asking a question, what if I give the input? What do you mean by that? Okay, thanks, Mita. Yeah, if you want to use scanner class, use scanner class Vijay, or you want to use, Vijay is asking a question that can we use scanner class? If you want to use scanner class, use that, definitely. Yes, see here in the game, scanner, you want to use here, scanner, use it. You want to read the data from storage, use it. You want to you read the data from a file, use it. Or let this data come dynamically. From where it comes, it's up to you, yeah. Okay, now what I'm going to do, let me explain you now what is the meaning of runtime polymorphism. Okay, actually speaking, this concept is nothing but dynamic. This dynamic binding is nothing but runtime polymorphism. Okay, so let me explain to you what is the meaning of polymorphism. Okay, now the concept is polymorphism. Oh, but 11:30, my time got over. 11:30, exact 11:30, I have one more class to start. So in today's class, I almost taught you what is runtime polymorphism, but anyhow, I'll talk about this concept in tomorrow's session. Okay.